Energy's Way is a new fusion practice. Body, mind, soul, spirit. Now, what exactly is this? I'm going to take this one word, this, and I'm going to riff on it. It's been something I've been contemplating for quite some time. And of course, the great traditions of wisdom, East and West, have been contemplating it a whole lot longer. So I'm going to draw on those, even as I say something that's a little bit new. And the newness has something to do with putting together what's usually kept apart. So bear with me in this. If you're a life coach, as I am, you'll get little hints of something here that go together with stuff that might appeal more to body workers who won't be terribly satisfied with what I'm doing either, because it's going to go together with enlightenment disciplines and meditation and yoga and qigong. But those people aren't going to be entirely satisfied either, because it's going to go together with some geeky stuff about energy and physics. And those people won't be entirely satisfied either, because it's just going to skim the surface. But the point is that these things all come together. At least that's what I have discovered, and that's what seems to be the case for now. So I'm sharing with you a work in progress. And while I'm writing up all of this on my blog and in a book, the point is that in those kinds of media, to do it carefully, it takes a long time to go through and sort of get the feel of it all, when the point is that it all comes together. So I use this word, this, as the single tag, and that's what we'll come back to over and over. So this is Energy's Way. Now first, how this first came. It was after more than 4 decades of body, mind, spirit work that I got up one day and found myself walking. I'm not going to get up and walk, I'll be off the camera. And it was very slow. Nothing in me wanted to go very quickly. And as a trained energy healer, I could feel in my hands, wow, higher than Kundalini or Raja Yoga or any of these high meditation practices, more than Qigong had ever brought in, because I could tell and scan how many multiples of what I was used to having happen in that period of time. It was vast and felt just wonderful. So then the question's, what's going on? After a lot of study, I noticed, oh, every major joint, ankles, knees, hips, shoulders, elbows, wrists, head and neck, 13 major joints, all going, first it seemed circular, then figure eights. What are figure eights doing in the body? I don't know. So I look on the internet. First thing I find is a diagram of a dipole. That means positive and negative. It could be electrical, could be magnetic. You'll have a magnetic field. And if you look at the 2 circles, the concentric circles there that touch, they make a figure 8. That's interesting. I keep looking and I find, oh, a lot of people are onto this already. That all energy fields are like a donut called a torus. And the way energy passes through is a figure 8. Wow, that was enough to contemplate for months. And by the way, on thrivemovement.com, a famous movie and website and effort to get people organized all over the world to help human beings thrive in all kinds of ways, they make a big deal out of the torus. That's a diagram from that site. And people called heart math have already gotten onto the way the heart has an energy field around it that is that donut-shaped field. So all that's very interesting. You know, is this a new story? And then what occurred to me is that I'm going to put these are all on the blog, so you're going to be able to see these, but to have the commentary, just its live, facial expressions, gesture, all that, may convey something that you won't get out of reading text. There's this famous diagram by Leonardo da Vinci. And you've seen it many times, only what does it mean? It shows that the dimensions, the proportions of the human body that have been known since ancient times. fit exactly in a configuration that is at once a square and with a slight change in position of the arms and legs, a circle. Since ancient times, people who do what's called sacred geometry have intuited that putting the square inside the circle in a way that just fits, which can't be done just with a compass and straight edge, is equivalent to the spiritual quest to bring heaven to earth, the circle being heaven, the earth being earth, and that the human form is peculiarly adapted to do just that. And some people at Stanford have sort of updated all this and said, well, this is very much the feminine form as well. Now, how is that? Why is that? Well, some people in the UK came up with this diagram showing that the configuration of circles, which are all over nature, all through the cosmos, and the forms of growth that you see in galactic spirals, which is called the phi function or the Fibonacci series, where you add 1 and 2 you get 3, and 3 and 2 you get 5, and 5 and 3 you get 8, and so on. The proportions we see in nature and art that are all over the natural order cosmically, that these occur in the human body in some very regular way. So it's been known since ancient time that this propensity is here with us. What's new is to discover very explicitly the principles behind what is the highest level of achievement in what we call flow yoga or qigong, only it's not taught right at the beginning. If you use energy scanning techniques, you can find most of the people who are teaching these disciplines are stiff, locked underneath. There is a discipline, the Feldenkrais method, for teaching people in various spin-offs, a lot of Feldenkrais students teaching all over the world, for how to release and open up. Only it's not yet been indicated clearly that what's achieved through that opening is not just physical, it's not just a change in body function, it's not just an improvement in the brain. It can be all these things, of course, they all correlate. But it is this ultimate quest that, in Western terms, bringing heaven to earth, or in Qigong terms, one with the universe, the energy of it all, that is the promise realized when we're free, open, and supple enough so that, notice, head moves in one set of spiraling figure eights, shoulders another, hips paired more with the head. This is an exaggerated form of what happens much more subtly when we walk freely and openly. But any good Feldenkrais teacher will tell you the hips and the shoulders need to move contralaterally. But why? Here's a diagram made by a wonderful man I found on the internet, who's a far greater geek than I, who shows how these toroidal dynamics, there are 3 of them happening all at once, that take place from the smallest subatomic particle in its spin, in its orbiting, and in the way its spin axis does something called wobble. It has a fancy name, polar axial precession. Our own North Pole does this over a 26,000 year cycle. But all particles, including galaxies and the universe itself, apparently adhere to these patterns. And interestingly, you can see the orbit ends up being elliptical, and it has 2 foci. That's interesting. Where do we find those 2 foci? In our own bodily movements as we go from left to right. And we do these spiraling figure 8 movements around those foci. So the so-called scientific explanation for higher consciousness is looking at the brain. It's all very interesting, but it's one little corner of the whole big picture. Always the big picture, the cosmos, an ultimate reality, whatever you call it, God, the uncreated, spirit, higher power. This is always at work in each little piece and part, including in us when we're free, open, and supple enough. So this is the larger story, but as psychologists found in the 20th century, starting with Jean Piaget, our first expressions of intelligence are physical movement. He called it sensory motor intelligence. We grab at things, we point, push, shove, punch, do all that kind of stuff with objects. What's happening in this discipline, and in all the ultimate discipline, is we open. Not to an object, not to a thing, but to openness. What is opening open to? Openness. Which openness? To the openness it opens to. It all comes back on itself. That's interesting. How about energy? What does energy do? Energy energizes. What does energy energize? More of itself. Energy energizes energizing all over. Well, these are absurd tautological statements. Why bother with these? Because philosophers have known that all ultimate statements do that. They've turned back on themselves. They're reflexive. That's why you find statements like in the Hebrew Bible when Moses asked the burning bush, "Whom do I say tells me to go to you, Pharaoh, to let my people go?" The voice says, "I am that I am." And throughout or numerous places in the Hebrew Bible, this word "this" appears as a reference to the ultimate. Hashem, Adonai, God. How so? "This, my God," sings Miriam, the sister of Moses, after the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, leaving oppression and enslavement. That a metaphor both for political enslavement and our inner enslavement, coming into the larger reality. This, exactly what's emerging here, and all the rest that arises along with it. So we find in Eastern traditions, the great Bodhidharma, who brought Buddhism from India to China, later became Zen, one of the great koans of Bodhidharma. This mind is the Buddha. What mind is this mind? This mind that gets this. This that gets this is this. Reflexivity turns on itself. Now, where do we see that? Oh yes, you know that as infinity. That's a name given in 1655 by a mathematician to this form that, as we've seen, gets expressed all over the cosmos. Is much, much more than any name we can put to it. It's also the Mobius strip that, with a slight bend, turns back on itself and makes one continuous surface in apparently 2 or 3 dimensions. What is that about? Well, I began referring to Jean Piaget, saying that the initial expression of intelligence is sensory motor. We grab at objects. What is the intelligence that comes into play when we start opening to openness? I suggest to you it's this intelligence. This that gets formulated and expressed most clearly in our highest disciplines, East and West. It's this that everything that goes around comes around. Or as above, so below. Or this, all that emerges out of itself into being more of itself. And as we proceed with the practice of this discipline, learning how to move, so that we first begin going from automatic rigidity to doing the moves that become this spiraling figure eighting, and then move into allowing them, we eventually get to welcoming these moves as a natural, effortless expression of who we are. And what do we welcome when we can come into such welcoming? Nothing so much as being welcome into this moment of life. We welcome welcoming that welcomes us into welcoming. So the word play is not terribly important except to refer to the way this reflexivity, this turning back to and in and through itself, is energy's way throughout the universe. And ultimately, the way of the ultimate, known in Latin as causa sui, the cause of itself. So all these come into play in the physical expression, the mental expression of understanding of this, the emotional expression of feeling this and feeling the feeling that feels this, and spiritual communion, communing with the communing that welcomes into the ultimate communion. And I know all this needs to be spelled out in more detail and taught and carefully coached for people to really get it. But I wanted to do this one time through so that you get the sweep of what's embraced in this one single fusion idea, practice, narrative, that's all focused on this for you, with blessings.